Let's begin by meeting Mr. Vignarajah's supporters. We have former Chief Judge of Baltimore City, Wanda Hurd, longtime civil rights leader Marvin "Doc" Cheatham, former 5th District Council member Ricky Spector, former federal prosecutor Charlie Scheeler, and former Baltimore City Police officer and FOP leader Robert Cherry. Our next guest is well respected throughout Baltimore. He's a former federal prosecutor, like Thiru Vignarajah himself. Let's welcome right now Mr. Charlie Scheeler. Charlie, how are you?
Fine. Thank you, Kai. And I just want to say it's a real privilege to follow Doc Cheatham, who is just legendary for his contributions to this community.
Well, thank you. I'm sure he appreciates that if he can still hear you right now. I want to ask you, when you were a federal prosecutor, did Mr. Vignarajah, was he in your office at all during that time? Because I know he was not only Deputy State's Attorney General, but also in the federal prosecutor's office as well. Did you have an occasion to work with him? Did your paths cross?
No, unfortunately, no. And the reason for that, Kai, is I'm a lot older than Thiru, so I was in the U.S. Attorney's office before he was. But I did get to know him because I hired him at DLA Piper. I'm the person who recruited him, and it was that great resume that initially attracted me to him, including all of his prosecutorial experience.
Why do you think he'd make a good mayor?
Well, Kai, at the top of the show, you said the two biggest issues for the voters were crime and corruption, and I think you're right. Thiru has by far the best program for fighting crime. When I was a federal prosecutor, along with Ed Burns, I prosecuted the biggest and most violent drug operations in East and West Baltimore. We took down an organization in West Baltimore that was doing several $1 million a week. And then Ed, along with David Simon, turned that into a TV show, and they called it The Wire. Why did they call it The Wire? Because the only way we could get the most sophisticated organizations was by using a wiretap. Thiru gets that. And he also gets that if you target those most violent organizations, it is just a tiny, tiny percentage of our community that is terrorizing the overwhelming majority of our citizens who are law-abiding and who want safe streets. That's what we all want for ourselves and our children. And Thiru understands by just getting the tiniest percentage of people who are causing almost all of the trouble, we can make our streets infinitely more safe for our children, and that in turn will lead to more investments and more jobs, and it's going to lead to better schools, too.
Public safety is clearly important. Right. Public safety is clearly important, Mr. Scheeler. Yeah, and I want to ask you, let's talk about the economy, though. Obviously, you being a partner at DLA Piper, if I'm not mistaken, perhaps the biggest law firm in the world, but you also serve on several major boards. Why do you think Mr. Vignarajah is the person to lead this recovery? Because, look, whoever is elected to this office, as I mentioned to Mr. Cheatham a moment ago, they're going to still have to deal with this $100 million deficit, the after effect of the coronavirus, again, with businesses shuttered, people out of work, and a lot of people, quite frankly, probably a little nervous about trying to restart a business that failed during a pandemic.
Well, Kai, it's a great question, and just by the way you asked the question, it's very obvious it is a very, very difficult challenge. So let's not kid ourselves. No matter who the mayor is, the recovery is not going to be quick, and it's not going to be easy. But right now, I'm the chairman of Rosedale Federal, and over the past couple of weeks, we have gotten out 500-plus PPP loans to nonprofits and to small businesses in the Baltimore area. So there are ways, and other banks have done an awful lot too, of course. All the banks have chipped in. So there are ways to get money to the small businesses that really are the engines of our community. And Thiru has business experience with McKinsey and elsewhere, and he understands that, number one, if you reduce crime, that will encourage people to come downtown more, to eat at the restaurants when hopefully we can eat at restaurants again, to go to the movie theaters when hopefully we can go to the movies, and the Orioles games and the Ravens games and all of the incredible cultural attractions that this city has. And he also understands that over time, we have to make our property taxes more competitive with our neighboring jurisdictions to keep attracting those jobs and those businesses. So between his crime plan, and then thirdly, we have to make every dollar count. And so one of the first things Theroux's going to do, even before he's in office, when he's mayor-elect, is to start commissioning audits, which he will be able to fund through private monies. It won't cost the taxpayers a dime. Audits of every single agency so that you, the taxpayer, know that every single dollar that of your hard-earned wages that's going to the city for taxes is being used for education, for economic development, to staff our police force and conform with the consent decree. All of those things will help get our economy going again.
And do you think reducing, if not solving, Baltimore's crime is going to attract new business as well to the city?
Absolutely, Kai, absolutely. This is, right now, we have a city which, unfortunately, the 2020 census will reveal that we will be the only major American city with a smaller population in 2020 than in 1920. But at the same time, I think Baltimore is the most undervalued place in the United States. I've lived in this area my whole life. I love it to death. I'm sure you do too. But there are so many things that we can rally around as one Baltimore, and there's so many assets. I think that we can bring jobs back. I think that we can make the streets safe. And most importantly, we can make our schools something that we would be proud to send our kids to.
Yeah. I can't describe to you in words how much I love this city. And like anybody, there are things that pain you greatly, and some of that's happening today. But stay there, Mr. Scheeler. Right now, our researcher, Julian, has a few questions for you. Julian?
Sure.
Mr. Scheeler, you have a unique perspective as a former prosecutor, much like Mr. Vignarajah. He approaches issues with that same sort of prosecutorial lens that you have. And so polling right now indicates that the majority of Baltimoreans want a non-politician to lead the city. So why is a prosecutor the right choice?
Well, the prosecutor is the right choice because crime is the big problem at the moment. Crime and corruption. Now remember, and corruption is also crime. And Theroux has a lengthy and very powerful resume in terms of fighting corruption as well. And corruption is just another word for stealing and wasting our public money. And so I think people are really tired of the same old faces at City Hall and the wasteful spending that we have had. And frankly, we just have not gotten a return on our tax dollars that we should get to get better schools for our children, better utilities for all, to get our water bills out, things like that. So what I think the people are screaming for is change. And Theroux's not a career politician, but he does represent change, and he represents a fresh, new, and extremely bright voice.
Now, in addition to being an attorney, you're also a certified public accountant, just inactive. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So Baltimore, as we all know, has faced some major fiscal mismanagement in recent years. So why do you think that Mr. Vignarajah, with your financial background, has the savvy necessary, the financial savvy necessary to right the ship in this city?
Well, number one, as I mentioned a little while ago, I hired Theroux to DLA Piper about 3 years ago. And he is as bright as any person I have ever met, and he works as hard as any person I ever met. And a lot of this isn't complicated. It just comes down to extra effort and really working the problems hard. And Theroux has those types of abilities. And he's got business acumen. He has worked in the business world. And so I have immense confidence in him to get the job done. As I mentioned earlier, he is going to audit every single agency. That has not been done in ages. The mere thought of just turning over some rocks and seeing what happens is a great idea. We will find almost undoubtedly millions, if not tens of millions of dollars that have been wasted, like all the books of the Healthy Holly series that were stored away after hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent. we will find many, many more cases of wasted money, and Theroux will direct that to the purposes for which is intended, because no taxpayer in the city should have a dollar of their taxes wasted by lining the pockets of career politicians or just wasteful spending.
Mr. Scheeler, thank you. Kai?
Julian, thank you. Mr. Scheeler, thank you as well.